Please be seated. The court is now back in session. I give the floor back to the lead co-lawyer for the civil party to put the question to the expert. You have 25 minutes left.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Expert, I wish to open a new topic, that being forced transfer. I shall ask you a few questions based on your professional practice and your experience working with victims of the Khmer Rouge. Also based on what has been said during the hearings over recent months. Could you please tell the court, based on your professional experience and your work with victims, elaborate for us the impact of having left their homes, of the victims having left everything they knew and owned. Can you please tell us what the victims told you about the impact on them as a result of leaving their homes, leaving their memories, leaving their belongings, and leaving everything that they knew?
Thank you, Counsel. As I have enlightened the court earlier, when we live somewhere, we have an attachment with that place, with the neighborhood, with the people whom you interact with. But then if there is anything that forces people to leave their location, for example, the evacuation during the Khmer Rouge period, then this attachment was detached. In other words, we left our house and then we lose security. Our sense of security is diminished. We lose the place where we worship. We lose the good memory of the place. We feel rather insecure in terms of spiritual as well as physical security. And in addition, we would feel the loss of the place which we are familiar. For example, we lose the source of income. We lose the place where we have acquainted with. For example, the philosopher of India once said that a home is the best school. So if someone is forced to leave their home, then it means that they lose everything. They lose their contact, their attachment with the family and the surrounding. During the Khmer Rouge period, when people were forcibly evacuated, they were detached from their loved one. For example, parents were separated from children. So in the course of evacuation, it was not the evacuation of people per se that was problematic at that time or that causes traumatic experience, but they were also tortured and they were subject to hard labor, including the living condition under constant threat. This was a traumatic experience. Once they were evacuated to any location, then they were discriminated against, and then the Khmer Rouge soldier at the base had strict surveillance on them, trying to find out their family biography or so they live under constant threat, and as a consequence that was a traumatic experience, and they lived in constant fears. Some patients one of the patients that I have treated, when he was moved to a new location, he had a lot of hardship. He had to worship, but at that time he did not even know which god he had to worship. He did not know whether or not that place were a secret place for any religious belief, because at that time mosques or churches or pagodas were built, so the worship traditions and religious ritual were destroyed, and they had a sense of disorientation of place and time. So it seems like the person was living in a completely new environment where he had to re-socialize. This is some things that affects the psychological status of a person.
Merci, Monsieur l'expert.
Thank you, Mr. Expert. During the forced transfer, many people described that they were victims of very violent scenes. Based on what you have heard during your work, can you tell us if any of your clients had suffered from any form of psychological or mental disorder as a result of having observed those violent scenes?
Well, the psychological disorder may be the direct result of the direct encounterance of the traumatic event, or by witnessing the traumatic events, or by just overheard the event. These events may lead to a traumatic experience. Now, if the person did not encounter this by himself, but the person witnessed the traumatic event, then he also suffered psychological disorder. And some victims only overheard the traumatic events, then he suffered this mental and psychological disorder.
Est-ce que vous l'avez constaté?
Had you taken notice of this during your professional practice?
Indeed, I have. They suffer a psychological disorder concerning this evacuation.
Merci.
Thank you. Let us return to another topic that has been raised frequently by the civil parties. That being the perpetual hunger and famine that plagued the victims. Did you ever hear about the victims talk about this permanent hunger? It's been raised by others as well. And can you please tell us what consequences this may have had on the victims and on their thoughts?
The President, Mr. Expert, please hold on. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I object to the phraseology in the questions of the lead co-lawyer. Are we speaking about victims in general? Are we speaking about patients in his practice? Are we speaking about people who are subject of a questionnaire used in this article in the Journal of Affective Disorders? We cannot speak in general terms about victims. We have to be very specific whether the expert now is speaking while answering about the things that he has encountered in his practice, or whether it is something that he has encountered while talking to people on the street or wherever.
Mr. President, once again, I'm rather astonished by this type of objection. I understand that my esteemed friend does not want to hear the expert make his comments. However, I've been asking several questions on the basis of his professional experience with, very specifically, victims of the Khmer Rouge. I believe that he's in a good position to talk about his experience in working with Khmer Rouge victims and not random people that he meets in the street. The comment just made is entirely out of place. I believe that this should have been understood from the very outset.
The President, the lead co-lawyer shall now proceed with her question. And for Mr. Coupe, you will have the opportunity to ask for clarification from the expert. If on any point you are not clear, then you can always ask for clarification with the expert. You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Expert. Would you like me to repeat my question for you?
Yes, if you don't mind, please.
I raised the fact that many victims had talked about their permanent hunger and famine, and how this hunger had dictated their behavior. Did you ever hear of any victims talk about their hunger and their famine? And can you please tell the court if, in your professional opinion, bore an impact on their behavior or thought processes? And if so, what kind of effect was there?
Thank you. The traumatic experience is an event that is so overwhelmed that a person himself cannot cope. Now, this traumatic experience has led to the change of behavior and thought process of the person. This also leads to the change of his belief as well as his interaction with others around him. So if he is under a traumatic experience, for example, at that times they were under widespread hunger, then the thought process were bound to change. Now, he or she may forget to comply with the moral obligation, for example, at that time. And I remember during the Khmer Rouge regime, the victims said they could do whatever in order to find something to eat. So this traumatic life experience had far-reaching impact, and he or she may change the behavior. I cannot be precise whether or not this impact has the impact until today, or it has already been over.
Merci.
Thank you. In the interest of moving forward, because time is of the essence, I'll ask you to speak briefly. You yourself talk about how frequently the victims spoke to you about hunger. Can you please tell us to what extent they talked to you about their hunger?
It was a common thing, because people at that time told us about the extreme hunger that they had to endure.
I wish to ask you a question regarding children who described to what extent it was difficult for them to see their parents lose their strength, their energy, their courage, to see their parents fall ill and suffer from hunger. Did you ever hear about victims? Did you hear from victims who described to you that? And describe to you how difficult it was for them to see their parents change and deteriorate before their eyes?
Yes, I have heard from the victims, from the patients. They have described the event. For example, they witnessed their parents committing minor mistakes, and then they were forbidden from crying out, so they expressed their sorrow for their parents. This was another psychological pressure added up to their existing pressure. As a result, they had tension, the mental strain, and they could hardly stand.
Merci. Je voudrais vous...
Thank you. Let us now turn to the community of Cambodians who are living abroad. Have you ever had the opportunity to meet with victims who survived the Khmer Rouge, who had lived during the regime, who are victims of the Khmer Rouge, and who are now living abroad?
Well, I have met through my internship when I was studying in New South Wales University in Australia.
Est-ce que vous pourriez
Can you please tell us what kind of psychological disorder these people suffered from?
For all of us, we generally think that Cambodian people who have migrated to a second country, like in developed world, we probably think that their welfare and well-being is much better than those who are staying back in the country. But actually, those people sustain their suffering like Cambodian people back in Cambodia too, because those people who have come across the Khmer Rouge period, once again they lost the attachment. During that period, they had to endure a lot of difficulties in life. So once again, the suffering still persists with them. Cambodian people who reside overseas now may find that they are living in a more secure place. They receive more social support than those in Cambodia. But what they lack of is the attachment to their home country, attachment that they had with Cambodia. For example, cultural relation and attachment, the attachment to a religious institution or buildings. For example, in the place where they reside, they do not have a place to worship according to their religious belief, and over there they have difficulties in communicating with them because of language barrier. So there was a study by Professor Hinton in the United States. It finds that the lack of intercultural support, the symptom of psychological disorder appears, and the PTSD also is rising as well as a consequence of the lack of support. And in the course of my internship in Australia, I also noticed that they also express their suffering, and the psychiatrist or the mental health counselor in Australia could not really help them that much. But once they consulted with a Cambodian counselor over there, they decided to return to Cambodia to practice certain religious rituals. They organized certain religious events for their lost parents and other relatives. Then the person got better because they believe that they have done something for them. Then when they return to Australia, these people become more active. So once again, those people who go to live in a farther place from their home country, they encounter some difficulties, social barrier, language barrier, and so on. They tend to also experience some difficulty. A professor in the U.S. also finds that even though they have lived in the United States for 20 years, these people are also subject to problems of PTSD as well as other psychological disorder.
Est-ce que vous
Did you yourself have the possibility to identify, perhaps not in precise percentages, but at least have an idea of the number of Cambodians living abroad who were once who are Khmer Rouge victims and who are now afflicted with some form of a psychological or mental disorder.
President, expert, please wait. Councillor Victor Coupe, you may proceed.
With all respect, Mr. President, what kind of question is that? Do you have an idea about how many people? This is an expert. Let's at least ask him questions about scientific research on this topic, but just broadly ask him what if he has an idea. I mean, really.
Je vais reformuler ma question.
I will reformulate my question. In your capacity as an expert, did you have the opportunity to assess the percentage of persons among Cambodian emigres who continued to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder? If so, can you please say something about it? Please.
I did not go and practice in overseas or with the Khmer who lived overseas, but with the scientific studies of certain scholars who dealt with the Cambodian people, and one of the studies by Grant Marcel, that is, after the 20-year period of a settlement in another country, the rate of PTSD remained at about 60%, and the depression rate is about 50%. That is amongst those, the subjects of whom he studied, that is about 1,000 of them. President, your time is up, lead co-lawyer. The floor is now given to the prosecution.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, there were many interruptions in my questioning. Please give me 5 minutes more and I will be done with my examination.
We will give you 5 more minutes, but in order not to be interrupted or objected, please make your lines of questioning properly so that you will not be objected by the other side. You may proceed.
Monsieur l'expert, est-ce que vous...
Mr. Expert, could you please tell us a word regarding victims who may have talked to you about suffering stemming from the prohibition from practicing their religion that is based on your experience? Can you say something about that?
Just I heard about that. In general, Cambodian people, when they face issues, they would seek assistance first in the form of a religious belief. But they lacked that aspect under the Khmer Rouge regime. And for a regime that did not have sufficient medical health and health assistance, they would only resort to religious belief. But turning to such a belief under that regime, or through a magic type of a belief, was not available under the regime. So they lost that aspect of assistance under the regime.
Enfin, Monsieur l'expert,
Lastly, Mr. Expert, Based on your experience with victims of the Khmer Rouge you met, based on the grievances that they expressed, can you tell us what their psychological needs are today?
In order to treat the trauma, there are a number of factors. Firstly, it could be a medical treatment and a counseling service. And secondly, in relation to the needs, their needs, we need to know what their needs are. In principle, the patient needs harmony, needs justice, and wants to know the truth, and needs to be respected in terms of their identity, their culture, and the increase in their economy. So if they could be afforded with all these needs, then their psychological trauma aspect would be treated or cured. In terms of service provided by TPO in case 001, civil parties wanted justice besides the psychological assistance by TPO, and they wanted an opportunity to participate in the reparation and to share their truthful experience, and they want to be part of the education to prevent such occurrence. And some also said that it's kind of an obligation as a child who must pay respect to the parents.
Je remercie Monsieur l'expert.
Thank you, Mr. Expert. I have no further questions for the expert, Mr. President.
President, the floor is now given to the prosecution to put questions to this expert. You may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Expert. I have only 15 minutes for my examination, and I have many questions. I will try to ask some of them, and I'll request that you be as concise as possible. I am interested in psychological and psychiatric examinations of victims that you have treated during your long experience as a psychiatrist. If I understood your testimony correctly, the reactivation of souvenirs, the pain of civil parties can have negative short-term effects in terms of increasing suffering and anger, but it may also have positive long-term effects. If these people are allowed to speak out. Did I understand your testimony correctly?
Thank you, and I'd like to focus on a study conducted by TPO in case 001. All of them showed their positive experience as they were able to participate in providing their testimonies. Initially, of course, it would trigger their memory that they could not sleep and that they would feel the anxiety. But these kinds of symptoms subsided upon the conclusion of their testimonies, and they felt that they were recognized by the chamber that they were given the opportunity to speak out, and that the chamber recognized their suffering. That is the important aspect that assisted them, and that it will also help them in the future.
Est-ce qu'à travers
through such positive participation in the trial by civil parties, particularly those who are allowed to speak, would other victims across the country identify with these participants and, in so doing, feel represented by the civil parties? Which means that it would also be a step in the direction of healing for them as well, the long journey to healing.
I think those people who participated in providing the testimonies could be an example for those other victims. Some of them, of course, would want to testify, but they might be scared, or there could be due to other factors, as I said, the avoidance factor. And upon seeing the appearance of civil parties, that could trigger the change in their mind, and that they may decide at a later stage to testify, and that is a positive thing, and that would lead to recovery and reconciliation.
vous avez longuement parlé du syndrome.
You have spoken at length about the syndrome of avoidance and recoil on oneself and suppressing one's feelings regarding the events that occurred during the Khmer Rouge era. Regarding the symptoms related to this syndrome, do you have some facts related to the Khmer Rouge regime? For instance, the prohibition to express one's feelings, to mourn the dead, to express one's opinions, or the culture of secrecy among the Khmer Rouge. Can these elements play a role in the syndrome that you have just described?
In terms of avoidance, they would think that would be the opportunity for them to deal with the suffering and the fear. So by being avoidance, they would not face those two aspects and not to speak about them. Sometimes the events that took place under the Khmer Rouge regime did not reflect through the symptom of avoidance, but when they face a similar situation, that would trigger such an event, and that would lead to the symptoms of avoidance. What happened during the Khmer Rouge regime is something that happened and that was hidden, and it was ready to pump out or to jump out once it is triggered. So then we need to really focus more on the aspect and to make sure whether it is the new event that triggered the events that took place under the Khmer Rouge regime.
Merci.
Thank you. Were there certain prevalent factors during the Khmer Rouge regime that could aggravate the post-traumatic stress disorder Let me give you one example. For instance, failure to understand the causes of the violence of the regime, the total absence of political meaning in the acts of the regime, absence of rationality, people dying for no reason, for instance. Could all this have aggravated the sufferings of the syndrome that the victims all suffered from? That is the post-traumatic stress disorders the victims all suffered from.
Thank you for your questions. Besides the service of psychological treatment and to meet the needs of the victims, it is the sense of giving meaning to what happened under the Khmer Rouge regime, or to give the meaning to what happened in this court. There is a study by Mr. Field on the psychological behavior and the feeling of taking revenge. Those people who have the traumatic experience and wants to seek a revenge, that symptom is linked to the fact that their sense of meaning is not that clear. For example, when it comes to what this court is doing, or the meaning that they gave to the court is wrong or incorrect, or the meaning that the person gave to what happened under the regime needs to be assisted somehow by other people, and whether their feeling can be reconciled, or whether their feeling would tempt them toward taking revenge.
Merci, j'ai encore.
Thank you. I have 3 more questions to put to you. Regarding persons who lost close relatives during the Khmer Rouge regime, can they feel guilty vis-à-vis those who survived? Do they feel that? Do they feel guilty because they did not endure the fate of those who died during that period? They did not endure the sufferings.
Yes, we did observe these symptoms for some of the patients. A study conducted by an organization in Berlin regarding the anti-torture aspect, and it was conducted here in Phnom Penh. Some patients expressed their regret as they could not defend or protect their relatives who died in the regime. And usually they are connected through the immediate family members, like the children or the parents who died. Yes, there is a linkage.
Merci. Quels sont les risques?
Thank you. What are the psychological risks and consequences for civil parties, victims in general, of the denial of responsibility on the part of the leaders of democratic Kampuchea? In other words, the fact that nobody is accepting responsibility for what happened and are blaming the leaders who are already dead, or who are blaming the faceless anchor.
As I just stated, one aspect of the treatment is to meet the needs of the patients. And through our study of the civil parties in case 001, what they wanted is justice. And if what happened to their relatives are revealed, and that would be part of the recovery mode for them. Another study by Mr. Asonis in 2012 on the population, those who feel that they receive a justice, they would feel less traumatic than the opposite group. So by getting justice is an important factor for them for future recovery.
Est-ce que le déni de responsabilité
Does the denial of responsibility on the part of the leaders be compensated by the possibility of them speaking during the trial, or the establishment of the facts and guilt during the trial?
Yes, it is to a certain degree, but if it is a full recovery from trauma, I don't think it is not as easy as that. They would still have that kind of feeling in their mind if they are not really clear on what actually happened. And of course that would continue to cause them this traumatic experience.
Ma dernière question est la suivante.
This is my last question. From the standpoint of progress towards healing on the part of victims, how important is it that the Khmer Rouge leaders be judged in this town by human beings instead of being punished in the hereafter by their own acts according to Buddhist beliefs?
President, expert, please wait. Counsel Victor Coupe, you may proceed.
Thank you, President. I hadn't realized that the expert is now also an expert in religion, in Buddhist religion. Maybe he is, but so far we haven't established that. So I think this question goes beyond the capacities of this expert.
President, thank you, Counsel Coupe, and your objection is valid. Expert, you are instructed not to respond to the last question put to you by the prosecutor. And the time is for the prosecutor as well. The floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense.
Monsieur le Président, je voulais juste...
Mr. President,
the time is up for you. In fact, you said you will have only 3 more questions, but you asked 4 more questions, so the floor is not given to you. And instead, the floor is now given to Nuon Chia's defense.
Monsieur le Président, mon point...
Mr. President, I just wanted to thank the expert for coming. That is all.
Prosecutor, the time is up for you, so please be seated, and Counsel Coupe, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm watching the clock. It's 7 minutes to 4. We had a long day today. I had earlier raised the point of the defense needing more time to cross-examine this expert. Now we have been able to listen to his answers this afternoon, so I can be more concrete and more narrow in my request. What my cross-examination in general terms would like to achieve is that the establishment, first of all, whether the expert might have in fact a bias against the accused, In order to establish that, whether that is the case, yes or no, I need to ask him questions about his ideas and notions about the Khmer Rouge period and the accused. Secondly, I would like to establish whether this expert does in fact have the academic qualifications to be called an expert. Having heard his answers, having reviewed his curriculum vitae, the defense has serious doubts as to whether he might in fact be called an expert. If he is, we should at least be able to establish that and ask questions in that respect. Thirdly, we would like to ask the expert questions about the methodology used in his practice, which led him to give his answers that he has been giving this afternoon. Questions, for instance, how many patients did he speak to? How many patients does he have? How did he establish whether the patients that he spoke to were in fact representative of victims? Many questions as concerns methodology of the answers that he's been giving. Fourthly, I'm puzzled, I have to say. I have been reading with great interest the articles and the publications put forward by the civil parties. There are some very interesting things in there, and I would like to ask the expert, if he is an expert indeed, questions about that. As a matter of fact, he has co-authored one of these articles, and I feel that it is in the interest of justice and the ascertaining of the truth if I be able to ask him questions about the article that he has co-authored, plus questions about the articles that he has just mentioned, which are also added to the case file, if I might call it like this. I might remember the chamber that last week a request came from the civil parties to have all these publications added to the case file and sent, in fact, to the experts so that we could be reading them beforehand and asking questions. So I have been now using up my 5 minutes, I think, or my 10 minutes. But conclusion, obviously, is that we need much more time to ask questions to Mr. Chim Soteria. Quickly responding already to an earlier point raised by the prosecutor that we are too late in coming with this request. It is true that we filed that, we sent that email yesterday, but I think it was timely, and maybe if we had 50 lawyers in our team, we could have done it a little earlier than yesterday, but that doesn't change the fact that it has been done timely. And so I move to request the chamber to postpone the testimony of this expert to another date, so as in order to give the defense the full rights of cross-examination, which under the fair trial rights are obviously one of the most important factors. Thank you very much.
President Councillor Coupe, can you tell us how much time you anticipate in putting questions to this expert?
Yes, Mr. President. We have indicated in our email that, of course, depending on the answers being given by the expert, that it might be a full day. However, on the other hand, I have also established that a lot of answers that the expert has been giving might not really lead to relevant evidence necessary for ascertaining the truth. So I would say, depends on the answers to our questions, but between half a day and a full day, I would say.
President, what about Kiev and Ponch defense? Can you tell us the time that you anticipate?
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon. As far as we are concerned, in any case, regarding all the issues raised by my learned colleague Coupe, would need we need about 15 minutes.
The President. Thank you, Mr. How about Mr. Sotira? Would you be available for the testimony tomorrow, either in the morning or in the afternoon? Response. I will be busy in the morning, but I will be available in the afternoon. The President, thank you. Madam Counsel, for the civil party, you may proceed.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to respond to the arguments made by Counsel for Nonchia, Mr. Kope, who explains that his objective is to establish some bias on the part of the expert, and he also says that the expert is not competent. Let me point out that since April 2011, this expert has been on our list, and he was scheduled to testify at least 2 weeks ago. I believe my learned friend was aware of that, and it is out of the question to increase his time in light of the questions he has, because he had all the facts to appreciate the situation. Regarding the issue that there are so many questions, I would say that all of us have the same constraints. We have to cut down our list of questions, and that is what we have done, and they should do the same. I would like to point out that the Council shouldn't talk about questions or documents that are not on the interface, because he did not place them on the interface. He has the possibility to ask questions, but not on documents he did not place in the interface. And lastly, let me point out that my learned friend has told us he doesn't have enough time and he needs extra time, whereas he knew well in advance that this expert was going to appear, and he did not make his request in time. So his request should not be entertained.
The President, thank you. And Mr. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too shall be very brief and simply emphasize that the civil parties have conveyed to all parties the table of information on victims' impact as a consequence of the alleged crimes committed by the Khmer Rouge, and this dates back to May 2013. Your chamber has also issued a subsequent calendar and schedule based on that, and since yesterday we received a long email contesting the time allocated. The defense could have done this on the 3rd of May. The defense could have done this much earlier, and today it is making an entirely excessive request to take up to half a day for questioning. This is disproportionate, unreasonable. The civil parties have been able to question the expert in the time that they have been allotted. We have abided by all of the limits and restrictions. We have pointed to many studies, and because of lack of time, the co-prosecutors have been unable to address further studies. Therefore, it is not justified to set aside time for the defense, time of up to half a day. This is completely excessive. It would be reasonable to allot a further 30 minutes at most. Thank you, Mr. President.
The President, thank you. After hearing the request made by the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chie and the observation of other parties, the Chamber has taken everything into consideration, and the Chamber decides to grant time for the two defense team to put the question to the expert. For the afternoon of tomorrow, at the start of the hearing of the expert testimony, we will grant the prosecutor additional 20 minutes at the beginning if you wish to put the question to the expert, and the remaining time will be allotted to the two defense teams.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, if that was a question, then indeed the co-prosecutors will use the 20 minutes that have been further allotted.
The President. Yep, thank you. I thank you, the expert. Your expert testimony has not yet been concluded. There has been many issues arising in the course of your testimony this afternoon, and we appreciate that you avail your time tomorrow afternoon to continue to testify before the Chamber. The Chamber decides to hear your testimony tomorrow afternoon, starting from 1:30 in the afternoon. The Chamber invites you to come to provide testimony in the afternoon. The time is now appropriate for the day adjournment. The Chamber adjourns now and resume tomorrow, the 6th of June 2013, starting from 8:30 in the morning. Tomorrow morning we will begin hearing the testimony of Mr. Schenberg, starting at 8:30 in the morning from through video conference from the United States. Court officer, please assist the expert to return to his home or to any direction he wishes to go, and have him return to this courtroom tomorrow afternoon before 1:30. Security guards are instructed to bring the co-accused, Mr. Nguyen Chie and Mr. Keo Sompon, back to the detention facility and have them returned to attend the proceedings tomorrow by 8:30 in the morning. And as for Mr. Nguyen Chie, he shall be brought to the holding cell downstairs, where audio-visual equipment is installed for him to follow the proceedings remotely. The court is now adjourned.